It was earlier than my usual arrival home, but my boss and I both left work early that Friday. As I turned into my driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar SUV backing out. To my surprise, my wife Carol was in the front passenger seat, and my 10-year-old daughter Cheryl appeared in the rear passenger window. I rolled down my window, waved at them, expecting a smile in return. Instead, I heard Cheryl say, "We're mad at you," as the SUV drove away. Confused, I wondered why they were upset. I knew I would find out when they got back, so I parked in the garage and entered the house. Carol and I had been married for 12 years. It was her second marriage, as her first one ended due to infidelity. This was my first marriage, and I had always remained faithful. During our earlier conversation, Carol had mentioned needing to pick up a few things, so I assumed they had gone out shopping. I figured one of her friends must be driving since she was in the passenger seat. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a cold drink from the fridge, and settled in the living room to watch some TV. I sipped my drink, trying to relax after the day's work. Once I finished my drink, I glanced at the time and realized I still had some time before the girls returned. I decided to take a quick shower. After showering, I went to the walk-in closet to grab some clean clothes. I put on a pair of jeans and went to the den to watch some more TV. However, I couldn't focus on anything. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I went back to the bedroom and looked around, but nothing seemed out of place. I checked the bathroom and noticed Carol's bathrobe was missing from the back of the door. Maybe it was in the laundry. As I walked out, I noticed the absence of her makeup and girly items on the bathroom counter. Puzzled, I shook my head, walked out, and scanned the bedroom. Still nothing amiss. I then went to the closet and froze. Most of her clothes were gone. How did I not notice this before? I stared at the empty clothing rods, completely taken aback. In a daze, I slowly backed out of the closet and approached our shared dresser. I opened the drawers on her side, only to find them completely empty. In a state of panic, I rushed to Cheryl's room. Almost all of her belongings were gone: clothes, toys, even her bedding. I frantically searched the rest of the house. I noticed a few missing items like small porcelain statues, an antique clock, and 3 oil paintings. On the kitchen counter, there were Carol's keys, phone, and credit cards, which I hadn't noticed before. I picked up her phone and realized everything had been erased. I checked our computer, but it was gone. I opened the safe and discovered that the jewelry had been taken too. My birth certificate, social security card, and some important documents were thankfully still there, but our marriage license had been ripped into pieces. Carol had left behind a note: "It's all yours," along with a power of attorney for selling the house. What had she done, and why? I hurried back to the bathroom to retrieve my phone, hoping for some answers. Luckily, all my data was still intact. I tried logging into our investment and bank accounts, but to no avail. It seemed all the passwords had been changed. In desperation, I contacted Carol's parents to see if they knew anything. "Hello," answered her father. "Have you heard from Carol? Of course. Where is she?" "We don't know. All we know is that she thinks you're not a good person and she couldn't bear another divorce. So she left with Cheryl." Why? What happened? I couldn't comprehend the situation unfolding before me. "You know very well what happened. Don't ever call here again." I stared at my phone for a moment before placing it down. I returned to the office and went through every single piece of paper, searching for any clue. I even checked the paper shredder for any unshredded leads. By midnight, I had found nothing. The following morning, I sifted through the papers once again, feeling lost and exhausted. I combed through the closet, attic, garage, and even her car, but apart from a few remaining clothes, she had successfully erased any trace of her and Cheryl from our home. At 8 a.m., I called the police, hoping for their assistance. Unfortunately, since she left voluntarily, they couldn't do much. They sympathized with my situation and filed a report, but it didn't provide any immediate solutions. Feeling helpless, I stumbled through the following days, reaching out to our friends, but I could only contact a few due to the lack of numbers on my phone and Carol's wiped clean device. I even went door to door in our neighborhood, inquiring about her whereabouts. When walking became impractical, I drove to the friends I couldn't reach on foot. I called her brothers, but instead of help or answers, I received threats of violence if I ever contacted them again. On Monday morning, I briefed my boss about the situation, and then I called our investment counselor. He was surprised by my call. She emptied the account. Sam, he informed me. My name is Sam, short for Samuel Conley. She told me you both decided to move, and she claimed you had left before her. I had no reason to doubt her. Numbly, I made my way to the bank to verify his statement. To my dismay, all three accounts, checking, savings, and vacation fund, were completely empty. Feeling utterly lost, I went to work and spoke at length with my boss. He shared a similar story of his sister's experience, where her husband returned weeks later with most of what he had taken. His advice was to wait it out, as whatever issue Carol had would likely resolve itself. The police informed me that since she left willingly, my options were limited. The only way to secure access to Cheryl was through a court order, but without knowing their whereabouts or state, obtaining one seemed impossible. As for the money, I was informed that if I filed for divorce, I could take legal action to obtain my fair share. For the next 3 months, I lived in a state of despair. I wallowed in sadness, worry, and tears. There was no trace or communication from them. Cheryl's school could only confirm that Carol had taken her records. I visited her parents' house twice, but the second time resulted in me being forcibly removed and threatened with arrest if I returned. Christmas arrived, and I spent 3 days sitting down the street from their house, hoping Carol and Cheryl would show up. Unfortunately, they never did. It was a somber holiday season, especially after I had decorated our home with lights and set up a tree, anticipating their return. Having hit rock bottom, drained both mentally and physically, I recalled the expression, "get busy living or get busy dying." I was tired of feeling like a lifeless shell. "Hey boss, I need some time off," I declared as I entered his office with determination. He asked when and for how long, and together we discussed various vacation options. He shared stories of the 12 ocean cruises he and his wife had been on, some lasting up to 3 weeks. He convinced me that being on a ship in the middle of the vast ocean, surrounded by nothing but water, would offer a rejuvenating break from reality. 2 weeks later, I embarked on my very first ocean cruise. To fund it, I sold Carol's car, although it felt like a small price to pay. Arriving in Galveston on departure day, I marveled at the massive cruise ship before me. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Within just 12 hours of being on board, I discovered that cruise ships were a magnet for meeting new people. Women seemed to appear everywhere, and although I wasn't actively seeking any romantic connections, it was hard to ignore the friendly and approachable atmosphere. It must have been the unique environment that made it so conducive to making connections. During the first night's dinner, I found myself seated at a table for 6. There were 2 married couples and a single woman named Grace Wyndham. Grace and I ended up sitting next to each other and struck up a pleasant conversation during dinner. Afterward, the group attended a live stage show together. Since Grace enjoyed the show, we decided to stay for the second performance. It was a surprising delight, and we enjoyed watching it side by side. The following day was a sea day, providing ample opportunity for Grace and me to spend time together by the pool. We chatted and got to know each other over a couple of hours. That evening, we had a formal dinner on board. Although I didn't have a tux, I wore my only suit. I was seated at a table for 6, joining another married couple, an elderly gentleman, and 2 women. Everyone except me was dressed formally and looked stunning. They were experienced cruisers who referred to formal nights on the ship as prom nights. We were scheduled to have 2 of these nights during the trip. The 2 women were close friends traveling together. They exuded charm, wit, and a slight playful edge. They openly shared their love for cruising as a way to have fun and let loose. I found myself engrossed in their conversation, and they seemed equally interested in getting to know me. After dinner, the 3 of us went to the bar on the top deck. We had a great time, dancing and enjoying ourselves until late at night. The atmosphere became more relaxed, and we started having deeper conversations. I felt lucky to be in bed with both of them, experiencing this level of intimacy for the first time in over a decade. I must admit, I used to have some biases. The idea of 2 men being together didn't appeal to me, but seeing 2 women together was always intriguing. The reality exceeded my fantasies. I loved getting closer to each of them after they had shared their affection with each other, and I took my time exploring each person individually. I cannot imagine anyone not appreciating the beauty of 2 attractive women showing affection towards one another, and the sight of their connection was awe-inspiring. When I engaged in intimate activities with the first person, their body felt warm, as expected. However, when I switched to the other person, their body seemed even hotter. This pattern continued, with each new encounter feeling hotter and more passionate than the last. By the early hours of the morning, we were sitting on their balcony, enjoying the view of Cozumel. We eventually returned inside, and they graciously bid me farewell with some delightful farewell hugs. I made my way back to my cabin and quickly fell asleep, not realizing that I never actually set foot in Cozumel. The following evening, as I stood in line waiting to be seated for dinner, thoughts of the previous night flooded my mind. Suddenly, Grace Wyndham from our first encounter tapped me on the shoulder. "Are you dining with anyone specific?" she asked. "I'm not sure. They might be," I replied. "We have an extra seat at our table." "Thank you. I'd love to join." I followed her to the table, which consisted of the same group as before. The dinner was fantastic, as was the show that followed. In fact, there were 2 performances that evening, and Grace and I were captivated by both. The talented individuals behind the show continued to impress us. After the second performance, I suggested that we have a drink together on the top deck. Grace agreed, and we danced a couple of times before settling down to talk and enjoy our drinks. Suddenly, a young man approached our table who looked vaguely familiar. "Excuse me, sir. Would you mind if I asked this young lady to dance?" he politely inquired. I glanced at Grace and noticed the excitement in her eyes, indicating that she was eager to dance with him, whether I minded or not. "Of course not," I replied as I got up from my seat. He took Grace's hand and escorted her to the dance floor. I watched them dance, marveling at the way they moved together. It was as if they had been dancing together their whole lives. I couldn't help but compare myself to him, feeling envious of his youthful charm, grace, and talent on the dance floor. Just as their dance came to an end, I made up my mind to return to my cabin and allow Grace to enjoy herself with this young man. After all, there were plenty of other opportunities for me to meet new people. I stood up as they approached, but before I could speak, Grace playfully slapped the young man on the shoulder. "Why weren't you ever this gentlemanly when you were growing up?" she joked before turning her attention to me. "Sam, this is my son, Michael." "Michael, this is Sam Conley, your son?" I asked, completely taken aback. "How old were you when you had him?" 5, they both burst into laughter, then we all took a seat. "Actually, I was 17, Grace replied. Judging by Michael's appearance, he seemed to be around 21, which would make Grace only a few years older than me. The 3 of us sat and talked for a long time, getting to know each other better. It turned out that Michael was the lead male singer in the ship's shows, and this cruise was Grace's first time watching him perform before his contract ended. In 2 weeks, he would begin rehearsals for a new Broadway musical. At 3 in the morning, I decided to leave them to their conversation and made my way back to my cabin. We were going to be docking in Honduras in a few hours, but I never ended up setting foot there either. The late nights were catching up with me, and I needed some rest. The next few days seemed to pass by in a blur as we visited the Cayman Islands and Jamaica. I chose to remain on the ship during those excursions. Over the course of the cruise, I had the pleasure of spending intimate moments with 4 remarkable women, including Grace from the previous night. No wonder cruising was popular among single individuals. It seemed that Grace was also enjoying herself during the cruise. I saw her a few times and noticed that she was accompanied by different men each time. I thought to myself that I should definitely go on more cruises in the future. On the evening before we were set to dock back in Galveston, my cabin phone rang. It was Grace. "I haven't seen you around much lately," she said. "I've been keeping myself occupied," I replied with a laugh. She chuckled. "I've been having a blast too. It feels like I'm back in high school." "Oh, too much studying," I teased. "Yeah, something like that," she giggled. But cruising has been even better than I imagined. My son says it's a non-stop party in the crew area. I can relate. I've had a few sleepless nights myself. I'm looking forward to getting home and finally getting some rest. Absolutely, she agreed. There was a brief pause before she continued speaking. "Listen, Sam, you live in Lake Charles and I'm in Houston. Would you be interested in meeting up after the cruise?" I didn't hesitate. "I'd love that, but before we make any plans, I think there are a few things you should know about me. How about we have dinner and chat?" During dinner, we opened up to each other, sharing our personal stories. Grace had become a mother at a young age, and had worked tirelessly to provide a good life for her son, who had a good relationship with his father. Michael was proud to be a part of his first Broadway show. She had done really well for herself. After graduating high school, she landed a job in a fancy department store. It was her only job, and now she was the district manager for 3 other stores. We talked for a long time before sharing a heartfelt goodbye in her cabin. The next morning, we arrived at the dock and I drove home. Things hadn't changed, and I still hadn't heard from Carol or Cheryl. I waited a week before reaching out to Grace. We ended up spending the next weekend together, and the next, and many weekends after that. About 6 months into our relationship, we decided that I should move to Houston and live with her. I worked at one of the refineries in Lake Charles. I spoke to my boss and asked him to look into the possibility of transferring me to our Houston refinery. He checked, and another month later, my house was up for sale, and I was living in Houston with Grace. I had been in Houston for 6 months, and Carol had been gone for over a year when I filed for divorce. Once it was finalized, Grace and I got married and embarked on our honeymoon cruise. She was the only person I shared a bed with on that cruise, and vice versa. Meanwhile, Grace's son Michael had achieved great success in New York. His play had sold out, and he was becoming a rising star. We visited New York twice to see him. I often thought about Cheryl and wondered, and worried about her. Life continued, and after 4 years, I climbed another rung on the corporate ladder at my company. Michael was in Hollywood filming his second movie, the first of which was shot on location in Europe. He invited us to visit, so we went. We stood behind the scenes, watching as he filmed different scenes. Between each take, people would come to him to touch up his makeup, adjust his clothes, or fix his hair. I observed as he received a folder before every scene. Later that evening, over dinner, I inquired about those folders. He explained that they contained changes to the dialogue for the upcoming scenes. It made me curious about the lady who delivered them to him. Her name is Carol, and she brings the folders before each scene. Why do you ask? She looks oddly familiar. Neither Grace nor Michael noticed the turmoil I felt, suppressing the uneasy feeling rising in my chest. Grace and I were riding back to the hotel in the studio's provided limo. She looked at me. What's wrong? The lady who gives Michael the dialogue changes. Carol, is my ex-wife. Carol, you're joking. No, I'm serious. Oh my goodness. What will you do? I have no idea. The rest of the evening was spent in silence. The next day, Grace returned to the studio while I stayed at the hotel. When she came back, she handed me a piece of paper. What's this? Carol's address and phone number. Michael's agent got it for me. Does Michael know why he didn't ask? And I didn't tell him. I just told him I wanted it. I stared at the paper. Go on. Go. You know you have to. I'll be here when you return. An hour later, a cab dropped me off at the address Grace had given me. I climbed up the stairs slowly, my heart pounding rapidly. Standing before apartment 206, I rang the bell. No response. I rang it again. The door opened, revealing my daughter. We gazed at each other until I finally spoke. Why do you hate me? You know why. What are you doing here? Answer my question. I walked into the apartment without resistance. Because you cheated on Mom. Who told you I cheated? I saw her glance over her shoulder. After Carol's first husband was caught cheating, she divorced him. Now, apparently I was accused of the same. Jimmy did. Who's Jimmy? Jimmy Wilson. You know who he is. He worked in your office for 2 years. No one named Jimmy Wilson has ever worked in my office. Where is he at this point? Cheryl looked over my shoulder. I turned and noticed a closed door. As I started to open it, Cheryl tried to stop me. He's sleeping. I opened the door and saw a man buttoning his shirt. He appeared shocked. Who are you? I asked. Who the heck wants to know? I do. Well, who the heck are you? Don't you recognize me? Heck no. Should I? Yes. You should. What the heck are you talking about? I've never seen you in my life. I moved closer to him. Take a closer look. Are you sure you don't recognize me? I told you I've never seen you before. Now get the heck out of my apartment before I call the cops. My name's Sam. You act like that should mean something. Sam Conley. You told my daughter that you worked in my office for 2 years. Sam Conley? I don't know any. Say. Oh shoot, yeah. Oh shoot. Now tell me why you told my wife that I cheated on her. I don't have to tell you anything, buddy. She's mine now, so you can get lost. I stepped closer to him, but he dodged around me and ran out of the apartment. Oh my goodness, I can't believe you did that. What did Cheryl just say? Heckin', what did I do? You tried to hit Jimmy. I didn't try to hit him, and you heard him. He doesn't know me, and he never worked in my office. You're lying. You caught him off guard, otherwise he would have beat you up. I'm going to call Mom. I stood there as she made the call. Mom, Dad's here, and he scared off Jimmy. Pause. I'm not joking. I grabbed the phone. He lied to you, Carol. You're the one who is lying, she replied. He had pictures. Now get the heck out of my house before I call the police. Where are the pictures? I want to see them. Forget it. You disgraceful son of a gun. Now get out of my house. And she hung up. Carol had never used such language before. The strongest word she had ever used was darn, and she always scolded me when I swore. And now Cheryl was saying heckin'. I swore occasionally, but rarely around Carol and never around Cheryl. These were not the two people I knew and loved. I tried to talk to Cheryl, but she refused to listen, and after just a few minutes I heard sirens and someone rushing up the stairs. The police didn't handcuff me, but since I didn't live there, I had to leave. I attempted to explain what happened, but they weren't interested. I had been asked to leave, so I was obligated to do so. Not without my daughter, I protested. I'm not his daughter. He's a lying man, she exclaimed. She used profanity again. I simply looked at her, shook my head, and walked away. I walked for a long time before finally hailing a cab and returning to the hotel. When I arrived, Grace and I discussed the situation. Michael came to take us out for dinner, but I opted not to go. I tried to remember anyone named Jimmy Wilson, but my mind drew a blank. I called my previous boss, who I knew would be able to help. It was after work hours, so I called his home. Hello, Sammy. What's up? He greeted when he answered. Not much, Lou. How are things? You know how it is. Same old, same old. What can I do for you? Do you remember a guy named Jimmy Wilson working at the plant? No, but that's not saying much. There are plenty of people I never knew, and still don't know, at the plant. Why? His name came up today, and I was just curious. I was told that he worked at the plant. Can you find out if it's important? I can try. It is. Lou, all right. Give me a couple days to ask around. Shortly after hanging up with Lou, my phone rang. Hello, you rotten cheater. How did you find us? Apparently, she had kept my number all these years. Oh, hello, Carol. It's been a while. How have you been? Sarcasm dripped from each word. Screw you. Stay away from us. Got it? Stay away. Cheryl is my daughter, and I want her in my life. He lied, Carol. Your boyfriend, husband, or whatever he is, lied. No, he didn't. He showed me pictures of what? Of whom? Screw you, you lousy son of a gun. Now get out of my house. And she hung up. Bad breath. Her language had certainly gotten colorful, as well as descriptive. When Grace and Michael returned, she told me that she hadn't told Michael about any of this, but I could if I wanted to. So I did. His first words were, "Your poor daughter. I feel so sorry for her." Oh my goodness, Sam. Do you want me to get her fired? No. She might just run again, and I want to find out why she left. As it turns out, I'm glad she did, because otherwise I wouldn't have met your mother. But she stole my daughter and turned her against me, and I want to try to fix that. They have no idea that I know you, so let's keep it that way for now. Let them wonder about how I found them. We talked for a bit longer before he left. Grace went back to the studio the next day, but I stayed away. I didn't want Carol to see me. I wasn't ready to get the authorities involved yet, and I now knew where they were. So I felt relatively safe in leaving until I got my ducks in a row. So Grace and I flew home. The first thing I did was talk to my attorney. He would contact a colleague in California to determine our next course of action. As a minimum, he could go after my share of the money. 3 days later, Lou called. I found out that Jimmy Wilson worked in our railyard for a few months. He was recommended for the job by his cousin, David Jacobson. Do you remember him? I certainly do. He was a photographer in the public affairs office. He was a sleazeball, and I caught him putting a pill in Cindy Smith's drink at the Christmas party one year. I turned him in, and he went to jail for a while. That's him. Well, I've been told by those who remember that little incident that he made some threats against you. He did. but I ignored them and him. Maybe you should have taken him a bit more seriously. Rumor around the plant is that he and his cousin Jimmy Wilson cooked up some plot to screw you over. Now, admittedly, this was all a long time ago and memories are a bit hazy, but there may have been something to it. Do you have his address and phone number? He chuckled. I figured you might want it, so I just happen to have it right here. Apparently, Wilson took off to parts unknown, however, not anymore. I know where he is. We're living with my ex-wife and daughter in California. Oh my goodness. Are you sure? I saw him there a few days ago. Well, goodness gracious. Jacobson still lived in Lake Charles and Grace, and I talked at some length about what to do. I was conflicted. If it had been their plan to come between Carol and me, it worked beautifully. But in all honesty, I came out better for it. I no longer had a wife who left me without making any effort to ascertain if the cheating accusations were true or not. Apparently, I was presumed guilty because she caught her first husband doing it. But there was Cheryl to consider. Did I want to rekindle a relationship with her after seeing the way she defended Gibson and vilified me? Of course I did. She's my daughter and was only 10 when this thing started. Grace knew me pretty well, so knew that I would be paying Jacobson a visit. The next morning, we drove to Lake Charles and checked in to a motel. At noon, I rang Jacobson's doorbell. His wife answered. May I help you? Are you Mrs. David Jacobson? Yes. Who are you? My name is Samuel Conley. Is your husband here? No. Do you have a few minutes? I'd like to talk to you about him. What about him? I took a deep breath. This was it. My wife and daughter left me 5 years ago, and I think he was at least partly responsible, and I would like to find out for sure. How was he responsible? It's a long story. She looked at me for a long time. I have no idea why I'm doing this, but come in. She ushered me into the living room and indicated the sofa. I sat. Now, Mr. Conley, you have the floor, I told her. The whole ball of wax. When I finished, we just sat and looked at each other. Finally, she spoke. David and I have been married for just over 2 years, but I've known him for almost 4. One of the first things he talked about was how he broke up the marriage of the man who caused him to go to jail on a false charge. A short pause. And you say he drugged some girl? She asked. Yes, I saw him putting a pill in her drink at our company party. I reported it and it turned out to be a date drug again. We just looked at each other. Finally, she spoke. What did you expect me to be able to do for you? I have no idea. I'm just grasping at straws, trying to figure out how to get my daughter back. She stood. If I think of anything I can do to help, I'll call you, she said, dismissing me. I left my phone number and went back to the hotel dejected. The next morning, Grace and I were having breakfast when my phone rang. Hello, Mr. Conley. Yes, this is Anita Jacobson. You were at my house yesterday? Yes, Mrs. Jacobson, could you come over? I may have something for you. An hour later, I was sitting in her living room. Your visit started me thinking. After we moved in together, I found a container of Rohypnol and asked him about it. He told me it was for his insomnia. I've never known him to need help sleeping, but occasionally I check and there are a couple of pills missing. She said, and he still brags about convincing his cousin to help break up your marriage, but it worked out differently than they expected. Jimmy and David apparently helped her get away from you. But somewhere along the way, Jimmy and your wife ended up living together. Yes, I know. I saw them a few days ago in Los Angeles. Oh my, you did? They thought you could never find them. A long pause. Then she stood. I'd like to show you something. She walked away. I stood and followed. We went to what was obviously a photography studio. For the last few months, I have suspected David of cheating on me. I've found pictures of women in compromising positions in his files. 2 of them are friends of ours. They're both married, and I'm sure he has slept with them, and knowing both of them, I would be shocked if they did it of their own free will. Then she pulled a stack of photos out of a bottom drawer and handed them to me. She sat and watched as I looked through them. In some of the photos, you could identify the subjects. In others, you could not. I didn't know either of the 2. The first few photos showed them dressed and obviously hugging. Other pictures showed them in various stages of intimacy and then closer intimate moments. The last one I looked at had my picture in it, and I was intimately close with some woman, and I had no idea who she was. Whoever the man was, it wasn't me. David showed me those and said that they caused your divorce. He laughed every time he told the story and bragged about how he was one of the first people to know how to edit photos. At first, I had no idea what that meant, but I came to know. He gave copies of them to Jimmy, who called your wife and told her he worked with you and had pictures of you cheating. He arranged to meet her and showed them to her. Then he had her meet David, who corroborated his story, and between them, they convinced her the man in the photos was you. The picture of your face with that woman convinced her. David is very proud of what they did and, as I said, still brags about it. He couldn't believe your wife bought their story. She paused, then handed me another stack of photos. Look at these. The last one showed the same picture of the woman being intimate, but the face of the man was different. If you look at the last one, the man has a tattoo of a black leopard on his shoulder. The one with you in it doesn't have the tattoo. I just shook my head. David did a pretty good job of editing, but he made a small mistake. We have been out to visit Jimmy. I met your wife and daughter. They are not nice people. Your daughter has been in trouble for shoplifting. She has spent time in a youth facility of some sort, and your wife has struggled with substance abuse. She isn't my wife. I think she may be involved with Gibson. They're not married, I can tell you that. They were together for a while, but then he left and went to Seattle. He just went back to California about a year ago. When we were there, Jimmy, David, and I went out drinking, and they laughed and bragged about what they did. Up until yesterday, I thought they were exaggerating, but now. I'm sorry, Mr. Conley. It happened before I met him, and I think it is despicable. I was sitting on the fence about his affairs, but what they did to you is beyond evil. And if, as I suspect, David drugged our friends, he deserves to be held accountable. There was another pause before she added, Jimmy Wilson is a terrible person with an unbelievably foul mouth. He doesn't care what he says, where he says it, or who he says it to. He's also a coward with neither scruples nor conscience. There was a slight pause. I guess that describes my husband as well. I couldn't say anything. She was a woman who finally convinced herself that her husband was a certified cheater. She went back to the bottom drawer and brought out a video. Take those pictures and this video. Use them as you will. I won't tell David you were here or that I gave you this stuff. She led me to the door. Thank you, Mrs. Jacobson. You've answered a lot of questions for me. You are welcome, Mr. Conley. You've helped me make up my mind about a couple of things. I can only deeply and sincerely apologize for my husband and hope that things turn out well for you. Actually, they have. Thank you. We shook hands. 12 years and Carol never asked me about the accusations or gave me a chance to defend myself. 12 years. It appeared more and more likely that I suffered because her first husband cheated and was caught. After I calmed down, I went back to the motel and hugged Grace. I felt that things had, indeed, turned out well for me. Now, if I could just get my daughter back. I told her about my visit with Mrs. Jacobson and showed her the photos. After looking at them and shaking her head, she asked, "What's on the video? I have no idea. Why don't I go to the lobby while you watch it? Why don't we watch it? Why don't we watch it together?" I took out my laptop and we played the video. It started with Carol sitting on a bed. It looked like she had just finished crying. Jimmy Wilson was sitting next to her and was speaking. "God darn it, Carol. The guy cheated. You owe it to yourself to get even. Now drink this. It will serve him right." He handed her a drink. She took the drink and sipped it. "Don't sip it. Drink the stuff. It will make you feel better." She gulped it down. They just looked at each other and fidgeted for a couple of minutes. Carol tried to rise, but he held her down. "Maybe I should go home," she almost whispered. "No way. You came here to get even, and that's what you are going to do. Now, just relax and I will get you some more to drink." He left and was back in just a few seconds with another glass of liquid. "Here. This will make you feel better." She gulped it down as well. They sat there and Wilson stroked her arms, brushed her hair, and hugged her. Then he ran his hand over her left part of her body. He did it again, with more pressure this time. She closed her eyes and breathed a bit harder. The third time he touched her. He then stood, took her hands and pulled her up. When she was there, he turned her around and whistled. "Man, what a fantastic body. I'm going to enjoy this." I saw Carol smile. She was starting to get into this. "You are, yes, absolutely. I'm going to make you feel so good. Do you have to keep using that word? What word? The F word?" Oh, you mean fudge? Sure, I can say fudge. And you will too. You'll be begging me to make you feel good. Never. I dislike that word before I'm finished with you. You'll enjoy it, he said as he pushed her down on the bed. And so it started. He started hugging her. I saw her smile. They always did. She loved to have her favorite treat, and he did it well. He had her bouncing off the bed and moving her hips to meet his mouth. Then he crawled up her body and on his knees rubbed the head of his. Do you want it? He asked. Yes, then tell me I want it. Why do you want it? I need it to do what connect with me, connect with you, and what? Do it to me, do what to you, make love to me, no. Tell me you want me to enjoy time with you, I can't. He started to get up and she held him. Don't go, then say it, I can't. He got up and walked out of camera range. This person doesn't want to get even with her mean husband. He can do whatever he wants and she won't do anything about it. He's a lucky guy. His wife will let him get by with anything. Then another voice. I assumed it was the one running the camera. Yeah, she doesn't care. Look at her at this point. Carol's hand was rubbing her leg. Whatever she had been given to drink was really starting to take effect. In all the years we were married, I had only convinced her to touch herself twice, and I loved watching her do it both times. Then she spoke. Come back, Jimmy. I'm sorry. Come back and be with me. Be with you in what way? Jimmy must have been standing beside the cameraman because Carol was looking right at the camera. Don't make me say it. Enjoy time with you. If you want to be close to me, tell me. Here I am. See me? And her eyes moved down from looking directly at the camera. Watch me. I'm being intimate just for you. I want to connect with you, but you have to ask for it. Oh God, bring it to me. Be with me and I'll say it now, or you'll never get it and your mean husband will keep doing whatever he wants and you won't be able to stop him. All right. All right. Connect with me. Be with me and connect with Maine. Jimmy got back on the bed and knelt over her. Her hand left her leg and reached for him. Now what do you want? I want to be close, as she moved her hips up trying to meet him and get close. What do you want and where do you want it? Oh God, I've already said it. No, you haven't. Now tell me I want you in my heart, she almost yelled. Why, so we can connect. At that point he embraced her and she screamed. Then they both got their wishes. They stayed close for several minutes before lying next to each other, exhausted. Well, said the voice behind the camera, that should serve him right, and my screen went black. Both Grace and I just sat there. Carol certainly didn't have trouble expressing intimacy anymore. They drugged her, Sam. The guys drugged her, said Grace so softly I could barely understand her. Yeah, I stood and walked to look out the window at Contraband Bayou flowing by. I felt Grace standing beside me. But she put herself in that situation, I said. She still didn't deserve to be drugged. There was a long pause. What happens now, I'm not sure, but I think we're going to California and then to the police. Both of us took some additional time off from work. 3 days later, I again rang Carol's doorbell. It was mid-afternoon. Cheryl, once again, opened the door. Oh, it's you. Yes, it's me, and you and I are going to talk. Forget you. You can't tell me what to do in the first place. Clean up your mouth. In the second place, you are my daughter and a minor. I have every right to take you out of here, and if you don't sit down and talk to me, I will do exactly that. Now sit down. She did. Where's your mother? Out, don't be rude. Now, where's your mother? Jimmy is picking her up from work. When will they be back? Pretty soon. If they don't stop for drinks, do they do that often? Almost every night, and leave you alone. Yeah. No big deal. Why aren't you in school? I didn't go. Why? I don't enjoy it. I paused and looked at her before I asked my next question. How long were you in the youth facility? What? How did you know about that? Answer the question, and don't try to lie. Which time? The one for shoplifting. Her eyes opened wide. Oh, no, she said under her breath. I told you to clean up your mouth. I was there for 2 months. What did you steal? Booze. Why? Jimmy was out and we didn't have any money. What did your mother say? She was upset. Why? Because you stole? Or because you got caught? Both, I guess. But mostly at him for telling me to do it. Has he lived with you the whole time since you left me? No. After all our money was gone, he disappeared and was gone for a couple of years. He came back last year. Why did your mother take him back? I don't know. Feeling sorry for herself, I guess, or lonely. When he left, she started drinking. A lot. She still does. Several times she told me she was going to call you, but every time she started drinking some more and never did. She had a couple of boyfriends, but they never lasted long. Okay. First, let me tell you something I said. I love you. I always have. I always will. Jimmy Wilson never worked in my office. Never. His cousin, David Jacobson, I know you've met him and his wife. Her eyes went wide in surprise again before she nodded. It was obvious to her that I knew a lot about them. Well, one time at a party, I saw him put drugs in a girl's drink, so I reported him, and he went to jail. When he got out, he promised to get even with me, so he and Jimmy Wilson showed your mother some pictures of two people doing what they weren't supposed to be doing. One of the pictures showed my face, but it was edited. Do you know what editing is? Of course I do. I'm not dumb, but how do we know it wasn't you? Because it's the truth and I've never lied to you, but if it's the truth, why didn't Mom talk to you? That one of the questions I would like to have asked her, but she never gave me the chance. I don't know, Dad. I'm all mixed up, I know. I've just recently discovered all of this and am trying to work it all out myself. Just then the door opened and they walked in. Carol and Jimmy Wilson. I jumped up and we just looked at each other. Carol, I said calmly, I told you to leave us alone, you cheater. Now get yourself out of my house. I'm not the one who cheated. You are then, I looked at Wilson. Isn't that right? I don't know what you're talking about. Now get out of here before I break your neck, Mom, said Cheryl as she rushed to her mother. I think you might want to listen to Dad. He's got nothing to say that I want to hear. Come on, Mom. Listen to him, then softer. Please. A long pause as Carol glared at me. You have 3 minutes. Then I'm calling the police, Carol said to me as she threw her purse on the sofa, crossed her arms, and continued glaring at me. Well, I don't have to listen to his nonsense. I'm leaving, said Wilson. I stepped in between him and the door. No, you're not. You're going to stay and listen. He moved towards the window and stood there. I started. Carol, what evidence did he, pointing at Wilson, give you that I was cheating? I told you before. Pictures, these pictures. I tossed 4 photos that David's wife had given me. Yes, these, she said as she quickly looked through them. Where did you get them? Take them out of your collection. They aren't from my collection. They're from David Jacobson's collection. Remember him? They're part of this set, and I tossed the rest of the pictures to her. The ones showing the faces of the lovers, in case you might still be in doubt, I said. Look at these 4 together. I took all of them and picked out 2 they claimed were me and the same 2 of the originals. Notice anything different? No. Should I notice the tattoo? The mistake he had made was to erase, or whatever you do to a photograph, the panther in the photo he put my face on and the ones he had shown Carol, but he forgot to erase it in one of the others. When I showed both copies of the same 2 photos to Carol, it was immediately apparent she had been lied to. She went pale and Cheryl ran over to look at them and saw most of them before Carol could take them away. Then she looked at Wilson. He's lying, said Wilson. He changed them. She looked back and forth between Wilson and me, not knowing who to trust or believe. I looked at him. Who said anything about changing anything? The only way you would know anything was changed was if you knew about it. I continued talking. They showed you the doctored photos and convinced you I cheated. Then the 2 of them drugged you so Wilson could take advantage of you. I have proof of that. I waved the video at her. It's all right here for you to see. And I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't one of both of them taking advantage of you after they drugged you again. At that point, her eyes went wide, and she shot an angry look at Jimmy. Then she charged at him. You cheater. You disgusting pig. I'll teach you a lesson. As she was confronting him, Cheryl had backed up and stood against the wall while Wilson was retreating towards the door. He's lying. He's lying. He's lying. He almost screamed as he tried to defend himself. He made it to the door and quickly escaped. Carol, exhausted, sat on the sofa and cried. Cheryl slowly made her way to me and hesitantly touched my arm. I looked at her and she was crying. I'm so sorry, Daddy. She hadn't called me Daddy since she was 5. I took her in my arms. Cheryl and I stood like that and watched her mother cry. Finally, Cheryl moved out of my hug, patted me on the arm, sat beside her mother, and hugged her. I went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, and gave it to Carol. Then I sat across from the sofa and watched them. I had my daughter back, and that was all that mattered. The fact that Carol now knew I never cheated was a positive, but I no longer cared what she thought. She sipped her water and looked at me. "What happens now?" she asked. "My suggestion to you is to find an attorney and see if you can prosecute Wilson and Jacobson. You have the pictures in one video, and if your reaction to my comment about both of them taking advantage of you is any indication, you know that at least one more video exists, and you probably know where it is." She nodded, then said, "What about us? There is no us, Carol. US died when you believed those two and never gave me a chance to defend myself." "Oh, Sam, I am so sorry." "Me too, Carol. Not only did you betray me, but you kept my daughter away from me for over 5 years. We can't get those years back, and I'll never forgive you for that." Cheryl came and sat on the arm of the chair I was sitting in and put her arm around me. Carol got up and went to the bathroom. I looked at my daughter. That was a nice thought, my daughter. Anyway, but I looked at my daughter. "Are you okay?" "I think so," she said. "There are all kinds of things going around in my head. Would you like to have dinner with me, and we can talk about them? I don't know if I should leave Mom, I understand. How about tomorrow?" She smiled and nodded. Carol came out. I stood. I should be going. "Cheryl and I are going to dinner tomorrow evening." Carol nodded. I looked at Cheryl. "I'll pick you up here at 6. Okay." We hugged and I left. As soon as I was on the street, I called Grace and brought her up to date. The trip back to the hotel was full of emotions. I was beyond happy that my daughter might be back in my life and happy that Carol now knew the truth, but I was also sad and disappointed that she had been deceived by Wilson and Jacobson. Not once, but twice in the case of Wilson, who by all appearances could easily come and go from her life. I decided to try to help her bring them to justice if that's what she chose to do. I was also going to see if there was anything I could do to them. Grace was waiting when I opened the door. She flew into my arms and we held each other in the doorway. The next 2 evenings, Cheryl and I had dinner alone. Then, on Saturday, we spent the morning together before meeting Grace. I had told her about Grace at our first dinner. Both of them were nervous about meeting. When Cheryl first saw Grace, she stunning came out of her mouth, followed immediately by, "Oops, sorry, Dad." Grace's first words to Cheryl were, "How's your mother?" Better, but still in shock. Going back to work will help her. It was a good day. We took Cheryl home and Grace met Carol. It went as well as could be expected. I told Carol and Cheryl that the next day, Sunday, Grace and I had made arrangements for a VIP tour of one of the studios and asked if Cheryl wanted to come with us. She was excited. "Which studio?" asked Carol. We told her. "That's where I work. VIP tours are rare. Sunday tours are even rarer. I'll be working because they're behind on shooting. Maybe I'll see you." The next morning, the limo provided by the studio picked up Grace and me, and then we stopped by to get Cheryl. She had never ridden in a limo before. I loved seeing her excitement. We toured most of the studio with one of their VIP escorts before going to the set where Michael was shooting. They told him we were there, and he came over to us and hugged his mother. She introduced him to Cheryl, who was too shocked and wide-eyed to say anything. He put his arm around her and said, "Come with me." He led her off to introduce her to several other members of the cast. They were gone for about 20 minutes, and when they came back, she was giggling like a little girl. "I have to get back to work," he said. He hugged his mother, shook my hand, and then hugged Cheryl on the "Don't be strangers," he said. "This guy is so kind," I thought as he walked away. Cheryl was literally beside herself. "Wow, she's amazing," she said, "but I am getting better. I can't believe he's your son," she said to Grace. The next time we saw him, he was getting prepped by the makeup people, costumers, and of course the script girl, Carol. When she brought him the new lines, he started talking to her and then pointed at us. Cheryl waved at her. She looked pained when she smiled and waved back. I haven't seen much of Carol since that day. Cheryl now spends the school year with us and her summers with her mother in California, but her California summers keep getting shorter because she prefers Houston and us. Whenever she comes home, Houston is home to her now. She tells us that Carol's drinking problem is getting better. It took over a year, but both Wilson and Jacobson were prosecuted and jailed for drugging Carol and the 2 married friends Jacobson's wife told me about. She left her husband and testified against him. Cheryl hasn't said any inappropriate words in front of me in 2 years.